everyone, welcome back. Today, I have the pleasure of having a conversation with Dave King. Dave and I met at an event. Well, we met first during the prep for an event, but we were having a conversation with the Women in Change Network, and we were doing a panel with a bunch of other people, and we were talking quite widely, putting the world to rights around things like, the impact of AI on society and ethics and all of these kinds of things. So we might expect the conversation today to take some of that kind of flavor. But before I go into that, welcome, Dave.
Yes, thank you for having me. Hi, so I'm Dave King. I'm the MD of Differentis. We are a management and technology consulting business. We are 25 this year. And yeah, it'd be great to have some conversations around AI. We've seen a lot of technology changes over those 25 years, and this is the latest one. It's got lots of potential, but like all things, there's no right and wrong answer with a lot of this. I think we need to have the debate and discussions and see where we end up.
Absolutely. So let's start off where we left off. Where we left off on the panel that we were doing was we had some big topics to discuss, and we were talking about things like the impact on not only companies, but the impact on society. I remember having one question from the audience on the ability to replicate somebody's digital identity and things like that. So I'm seeing a lot of big questions, a lot of curiosity, and people in society generally, not just in organizations, starting to think more widely about what the use cases could be and what the impacts could be on us. One of the impacts I see professionally is the potential for roles that we used to have maybe not being required anymore, and us coping with some of those things, not only conversationally, but asking ourselves these big questions. What kind of things are you seeing, Dave, in the curiosity side of things as we start to consider what the societal impact or the organizational impact of this new technology disruption?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it comes down to a lot of conversations, as you've said, are around, where does technology start potentially getting us to, I would say, rethink jobs rather than replace. I think, yep, there will be jobs today that won't exist in the future, just like 30, 40 years ago, there were jobs then that don't exist now. We can see it as a threat, and we can start panicking and going, what we're going to do about these things. But if I look at it, let me give you an example. I was working with a friend of mine over in Switzerland, and he has an AI company, and they were working for a national dentistry organization. And what they were looking to do was to say, can we get AI to look at a lot of our dentist x-rays and scans and things and start picking up things that we might be missing as humans? So they did the work. And when they came back, they said, actually, yep, do you know what? We can get AI to do this. It's going to be somewhere in the region of 70% accurate. Now, with it being technology, the initial response was, can't possibly do that. It needs to be well over 90%. It's got to be perfect because it's technology, therefore it must be perfect. Long story short, they finally got the client to let them do a study on the human performance at this organization, and they found actually they were around 40% accurate. So you nearly doubled accuracy. It's not perfect, but it's definitely better than it was. And what they found then was it freed up people's time to go and do other activities that they often didn't get time to. So imagine in that type of environment, they had more time actually talking to patients, explaining to them what they need to do, what's going on, how they're going to help solve the pain they're in or anything else that they're doing. They didn't need to be spending the amount of time they were spending on looking at the various x-rays and the scans. And I think that's where what I'm seeing in a lot of organizations is where AI becomes powerful is how can it churn through a lot of that, I don't necessarily say mundane, but a lot of those tasks that can be very manually intensive to free up the human capacity either to be more creative or to have more human connection, whether it be with other clients or patients or whatever that is. So I think if we can rethink the jobs we have today, I think we could be into a good place. I don't know, what are you seeing in some of your world?
So I'm seeing this conversation happen, and some of these things where we say it frees up people's times to do other things, to be more creative, to build relationships, to solve problems, to wax lyrically on the impact of this on humanity. Whatever it is, right? We're saying that people can go and do these things. But my doubt in this kind of space is and this is a classic problem for learning and development organizations generally, is that we have this utopian idea which is unrealistic. And that utopia is that every single person who works would be creative, would be able to solve problems, would be excellent at building relationships. And these kinds of attributes are normally distributed. So we have some people who are great, some people who are very bad, and some people in the middle who are varying degrees of good at this thing. And the reality of this conversation is that we might be able to free up people's time to do more creative things, but we might have varying levels of productiveness, varying levels of creativity with that time, which eventually does lead to some displacement, particularly where people have had the jobs for many years where they haven't had to do any of this stuff because they have been focusing on the repetitive tasks, the manual tasks that you're talking about. So that's where there is cause for concern, because with those folks who maybe aren't so adaptable, what did they go and do? Because they are a large proportion of the population, right?
Yeah, and that's a valid point. I guess part of my thinking there, though, is some of this comes down to choice. Right? Now we could sit there and we can go, "Oh, yeah, I'm not creative. I'm not a people person, except." But like I said, if we look 50 years ago, 100 years ago, to the type of humans we were then and the jobs they were doing, most of us today wouldn't have survived in that world. You know, it was a very different environment. Over the course of whether it be our parents or our grandparents or ourselves, we consciously or subconsciously made a decision to change and put the effort in to change. I think, as with everything, there are going to be those that see opportunity, and there are going to be those that look at it as a challenge, and there'll still be ones that will sit there and unfortunately do very little, and then ultimately get passed by as AI comes on. And I think, as you remember from the panel we did a couple of weeks ago, you know, I'll always use my Charlie and the Chocolate Factory example, the Johnny Depp version, rather than any
Oh,
others.
no. We can talk about that in a second.
Charlie's dad at the start of the film had a job of putting caps on toothpaste. The robot came and replaced him, and at the end of the film, he got a job fixing the robot that replaced him. There are different ways we can look at this, and it's not saying it's always going to be right and there's not going to be any challenge. I think it starts with having the debate and people, as you said, being curious and being open to how do I need to change to make best of myself and my children in the world that I think is coming.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because it opens the door to another conversation, right? And that is, I, as an individual existing in a world that has changed, almost I will go on a hero's journey of my own, which is one of the classic models of storytelling. And I'll go on this journey, and there will be a normal world which is to some degree changed. I can take up that call to action and go on my own quest and better myself, or I can refuse the call to action. And we will always get people who will refuse that call. We will always get people who will accept that call, but maybe will fail in the face of adversity. And we will get people who will succeed all the way through to the end of the quest. So that's the nature of people. I think the difference, though, is you started by saying, you know, we've seen changes, we've seen automation, we've seen disruption happen in the past. With this particular disruptive revolution, we're coming to a point where we have technologies that will be able to do things better than people. Your point about accuracy is a great one. So the question is this revolution the same as previous, or is it somehow different?
Good question. Good question. I think it's a difficult one to answer as well, because we live in a world right now where so much of everything we see and hear, and I'm not going to get political or anything like that today, but everything seems to be so black and white now. Everything's soundbited. It's kind of, this is right, that's wrong, bish, bash, bosh. Some of it comes down to choice, right? So I'm just looking over your shoulders there, your guitars. Now, technically, AI already exists that can create music. Doesn't mean we choose to listen to it, and it doesn't mean we choose to like it. We still do things because, you know, as human beings, we are built to experience certain things. AI absolutely has the potential to be a real big shift compared to what we've seen probably over the last 10, 20 years. You know, this is definitely feels like potentially the biggest one, but it depends whether people debate it. How much are people going to go, yep, it's all good, or yep, it's all bad, or right or wrong? It will be a success for all of humanity if we engage in the massive grey areas around it. It will be a success for the people who want to make money out of it. in the short term if we allow ourselves to get pulled into this soundbite world we seem to live in.
You see, on your point on AI music, of course, I'm going to pick up. We talk about that for a second, right? So I've used Suno. I don't know if anybody who's listening to this knows what Suno is, but go and look it up. It's an AI music generator. Now, there are a couple of points of nuance which are very interesting about Suno. You can look at the terms and conditions and who owns what when you use it, who owns what when you put your own creative thought, your lyrics, for example, you put that in there. But there's a difference between music and music, right? Just like there's a difference between art and images. Now, if I split up my perspective on music for a second, so we have, first of all, as a listener, the things that I listen to, I dissect all of the different parts that are happening and I get pleasure from each of those parts. The drums are doing this. The hi-hats on this particular point were particularly rhythmic, the chug of the rhythm guitar, whatever it happens to be. And it evokes, obviously, an emotional reaction, but it also evokes an intellectual reaction for me. Anyway, some people listen to the lyrics. We can replicate some of the patterns that we've seen in previous music. That's a training data set, and we can apply AI in the broader sense, generative AI or pattern recognition to this, and we can figure out, well, this is what a typical chord progression would look like. So if we think about all of the corporate music out there, the little soundtracks underneath the videos that corporations use to put their services out there, it's all canon. The chord progression that we all hear at weddings, it's that, right? So you would have something that's in D major, you maybe have a B minor in there, and then you go through the fairly standard chord progression of G's and A's with that. It's all that. All of it. Corporate music is all that one thing. You go to Suno, you can replicate that very, very easily. I've done it a couple of times. The intro to this podcast, I did that. Didn't record it. I just put in a few things into Suno, and there it is. Now, that's something that you hear that is kind of background music. Maybe it accompanies a voiceover. Maybe it accompanies some other kind of information. Maybe you listen to it on its own, and that's fine. But we shift to the other end of the spectrum, and we start to think about music as a creative expression of angst, of things that are happening in society. I always use the example of Nirvana, right? That was a band that spearheaded the Seattle sound, the grunge movement, which was some kind of social rebellion against the music that was happening before, some kind of shift, an expression of novelty, an original thought that was manifest in music. We have the same thing with art. So we see an image generated by Midjourney, by DALL-E or Sora or any of the newer models that are currently available to us. Is that the same as seeing the Mona Lisa or something? The difference between an expression of thought, an expression of culture, and an image, they are different things. So the original thought, the creativity, that kind of thing, probably we're not going to get that if we're training a model on previous data, because the next new thing maybe won't come from there. What do you think about that?
If you take that thought process and then you apply it to business, you get an interesting conversation, because then you say, well, if I am plugging AI into my company and I run a consult business, right? You run a consult business. There's lots of consulting businesses out there. If we all plug AI into our consulting business and say, right, that's it. We've plugged AI in. We're going to do all this stuff. It's going to be much faster. But it's trained on the same information. It's trained on history. So where's the competitive advantage? Where's that little spark makes your company compared to one of your competitors? And it's a great example there when you talk about the music and art, when you apply it across to business. But actually, business, whether you are a for-profit, a not-for-profit, whatever else, you still exist in a competitive landscape. Even if you're a charity, there are multiple charities for cancer, and you are still, in effect, competing with other people to get access to a value exchange. We'll call it a value exchange, not just cash. The fair value exchange. But it's what makes you compared to them going to someone else. It's the same in relationships and everything else. I think from what I've seen so far in AI and from what I understand from this conversation so far, when you look at those more repetitive tasks, you can say, look, 1 + 1 = 2. 1 + 1 = 2. 1 + 1 = 2. Now, you can't extend that into, as we've seen, into the developer space, whereby you've got AI supporting developers to be quicker. We've got consultancies like ourselves looking at tooling that says, how can I, in effect, 10x a BA or a PM? So, i.e., how can I take a single resource and get them to do what I would have had 10 people to do in the past? Those things you can do. but you still need that creative brain space or that uniqueness that says, but the way we've done that is different to someone else. So you might have two consultancy firms that say, we can both X our BAs, for example, but we can do that by using AI tools plus our own experiences, our own knowledge, our own creativity to say, but the way we're going to do it is we're going to focus on this part of the BA lifecycle, and that's where we're going to deploy AI. We're going to use the human brains around here. Now, someone else might do a different job. So you've still got that originality. You both use AI, but you've still got different results, different responses. And then it's a conversation with the client. And this is back to how consultancy has been for the last few years. The real challenge of AI helps us, hopefully, to stop having conversations on day rates and start having conversations around what outcome are you after? How we go about achieving that outcome with you will be different to consulting company A, B, and C. You need to make a choice, client, on which one you're going to go with to achieve that outcome. Again, back to the shared value exchange, to get to that point is where we need to aim for rather than the transactional day-to-day.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. I mean, generally, the idea is you're all doing the same things as everybody else. You're not special, right? And if you're not special, you've got no competitive advantage. I guess there is a conversation there around the uniqueness of the AI part of the value chain. So what you've said is, yes, you could configure where you use AI in your processes. And you could also, I don't know if you meant this, but I'm going to add it, right? You can also deploy AI in different ways. So it's, even if you were to say, well, you're going to use it for BA, I'm going to also use it for BA, and we're going to have people do some other bits. How we actually use it could also be different. So we could have something that's very highly trained and specialized on how I have my own talking points and I have my own opinions based on all the things that I've written, all the things that I've said, and all of the, background of my particular way of thinking, versus I could be deeply ingrained in repeatable processes, for example, or we could have our own proprietary method of doing a particular analysis. So all of these things are possible, but we go down this avenue of a force multiplication. The things that I do, I want to magnify those things that make me unique and make me special, rather than doing the same things that everybody else does, which is only good if, there's the if, right? It's only good if we're able to use the tools in a way that is more than just rudimentary. And I have spoken about this a number of times in the last couple of weeks, that many of the conversations that I am drawn into is this first point of discussion, whether it's at a conference, whether it's at a bar, whether it's with a client in a meeting, whether it's on a project. The first point of discussion is usually something like the trough of disillusionment, where we say, well, somebody will say, I used ChatGPT for X. I asked the question and the response that came back wasn't great, so I have to do these things myself. And that always causes doubt from my end, because as many of you will know if you're watching this and using some of the tools and following along some of the previous podcasts, but Dave, you'll know this as well, that if you ask a question and you get a response, the first response is never amazing. You have to work with it. You have to go back and forth. You have to fine tune it. And I don't mean that in a fine tuned model sense. You have to ask further questions. You have to clarify. You have to add information. You have to work with the tools that you have to refine the thing that you want in your way that is special and that's your expertise. Do you get, this is a question for you, Dave. Do you get a lot of these kinds of first questions that lead to a discussion? What kinds of questions do you usually start a discussion with?
Yeah, so I think you're right on that first point. You'll get a lot of people that will, whether it be GBT or any of the others out there. I went in and I just asked the question. What it came back with, that was rubbish. I'm not going to use that again. But to your point, the first thing is, okay, so be curious. How can you ask it differently? How can you, and it is almost the easiest way I talk to people about, have a conversation with it. If you're talking like we are now, or if you're talking to a mate down the coffee shop or whatever else, you just ask one question, get a response, and go, oh, that was it then, job done. You ask and you refine, and you come to a reasoned endpoint of, okay, that feels like kind of where I thought we were trying to get to. So that's one bit. The second bit is always then going to be around data is a big one, especially a lot of certainly with the larger corporate clients we work with, which is, okay, we're quite worried in our corporate environment of our staff coming in and dropping onto ChatGPT or whatever else and sticking in all sorts of stuff that's actually our company data and we don't know where it's gone. And when it comes back, what can we trust it? Are things secure? What about X, Y, Z? So there's often lots of conversations around that, and where is it appropriate to go out and use the big off-the-shelf solutions versus actually, do you need to be putting something more internal? Do you actually create, if you're new on the journey, you don't want to dispel the innovation in your team or the curiosity in your team, but actually create more of a sandbox environment where they can go, okay, we've created a space for you in our corporate world. In there, you can go and play, but here are the rules. Don't use company data in this way. Play with it so you can understand it. If we can find something that we think's got value to the company, we might then look to go and say, okay, that particular use case or scenario could be of value. Well, let's try and build something along those arms. And that's where you start looking at lots of conversations around end users and LLMs and the big chat GPTs. But actually, what about SLMs? When you talk about, you saying earlier about your history, you train it on everything that you've done in the past. Well, companies have their own data. How do you train something on your data that is yours and keeps that uniqueness and your competitive advantage without just going out to the open markets? They're probably the three starting points we'd have. If you're brand new to it, find some, I wouldn't say safe necessarily, but managed way, within guardrails where you can encourage people to learn and have a play. I always think, play by learning or learn by play is the way to go, but in a way that doesn't mean your company is going to be on its knees if they dump all your company data out into the world. And the second is, don't stop at the first point of going, okay, it doesn't work. And that I would say is similar to previous technology trends with RPA or anything else that came out. You'd find normally the first use case and it go really well because it would be, you really thought about this one and it might be a finance role or process or whatever else. Or a lot of these things tend to start in finance, right? Because that is a very transactional 1 + 1 = 2, etc. You put these things in, you go, it's worked great. But then you skip past everything else and you go, right, that's it. It's worked in that one particular use case. We're going to deploy it everywhere. And then you suddenly find, as we're seeing now, let's be honest, if you look at the amount of CIOs currently that are moving on, shall we say, from various roles, because they've spent millions over the last couple of years on AI tools, and they've not thought about what is the actual outcome we want for the company. And that's where I think the conversation gets interesting, because when you talk about AI, it is a technology. And very often, the technology people in a corporate organization don't talk to the HR people, don't talk to the ops people. You have those silos. And very often, the ops guys are, I just need to deliver a thing. I need to deliver it on time. You've got HR and maybe the change teams and the learning people saying, okay, how are people going to use this? What are they going to feel? How's it going to look? And the technology guys are going, this is the latest, greatest thing. It looks fantastic. Let's go with it. And developers will be looking at what's the latest code. Starting the debate across the silos is always where we try and start clients in those conversations.
Yeah, I wonder if I'm seeing something different. Let me just go through that. One of the things that I'm seeing with the technology side of transformation is there seems to be a rush to take, companies have workspaces, companies have IT environments, and there seems to be a rush at the moment for companies who are Microsoft houses to implement Copilot. And it seems like an obvious play, right? Low-hanging fruit, let's just get it in there, just activate a few licenses, send them out across the landscape and see what happens. And that is, I wouldn't say that's a great technology strategy, because you should be thinking about what the business needs and then deploying the appropriate tools and thinking about integrations that solve the problems that you have as a business, not just implementing the easiest thing, right? But in that space, there becomes a conversation around, well, if we need to take it back a step, each of the models that is out there within application interfaces, so a GPT model might be in a chat GPT interface. Each of the applications, each of the models does something slightly different that's slightly better than some of the others, right? So you might go to one for narrative structure and realism. You might go to one to develop code bases. You might look at another one to develop sort of data tables or something. You might go to another one for deep research. So everybody will find their own sweet spots and their own workflows, but they don't all do the same thing well. And in that space, then you have the next tier up, which is generally software as a service, where different applications do different things depending on how they're configured and what they do. So you can go to an image generation software to write you a story, for example. So it's important to figure out what it is that you want to do before you then go off and do it, But back to the Microsoft example, and I'm not picking on Microsoft. It's obviously business technology that everybody's used to using, Office and Windows and all of these things. In that scenario, you then have a second decision. So the first decision is, I'm going to implement this thing because it's within our environments. It's easy. We don't have to do all of the activities that we might need to do if we were to implement something completely different. The second decision, though, is the one where we say, well, now we've got one AI solution, we will stop any other AI solutions from being implemented. This is our governance. Everybody has to use this one tool, no others. And that second decision is causing pain because a lot of what I'm seeing out there is, we want to do this, we want to do this other thing, we want to do this, we want these tools because they're specialist or niche tools. It's not just a general purpose tool. And then you start to get into this back and forth with technical teams who have said, well, we've got one. Why do you need another AI tool? So there's a kind of a lack of understanding, and that lack of understanding comes from a lack of common language, a lack of understanding of the use cases, the business problems that we're trying to solve, and all of these kinds of things. So I'm seeing this. Are you seeing some of that?
I am, and I think, from a technology perspective and an IT perspective, in some ways, the pandemic has made it even harder because for years, right, you would have your enterprise architects or whatever going, okay, this is our strategy, this is our tech roadmap. These applications are going to be refreshed. These ones are going to be retired, etc., etc., etc. And it takes a long time to put anything in. Yeah, suddenly the pandemic hit overnight. Everyone went, "Oh right, okay, we just need to turn some stuff on," and it became a little bit chaotic, right? But on the whole, I would say it was managed chaos because it was still broadly in your corporate environment. I know there are examples of people using Zoom the wrong way, or whatever. But Microsoft is a good example because overnight people were turning on Teams rather than having strategies and thinking about it. So just turn it on, and it worked. The challenge then was the mop up afterwards because people turned Teams on, and in a few weeks, hundreds, thousands of different teams and channels and data sprawl and stuff everywhere. And even now, I think a lot of people are looking at it going, I've no idea what the right version of this particular document is or that particular document is. But what it did show is if you push, how do you put it? If you push IT hard enough, they can just switch things on, and it helps. So that is set an expectation on technology for the wider part of the businesses to go just push the button, just turn it on. And I think to your point around, they've gone, yeah, look, and again, not picking on Microsoft, but we'll go with that because it is, it's the one that's in most clients. We've turned Copilot on. You're not having anything else. You've got that. We don't want to end up in the situation we were previously where we had stuff all over the place. And that's why I'd always encourage them to say, look, whatever you call it, whether you call it a sandbox, lab, an innovation center, whatever it is, have some sort of landing zone where new tools can be put in there. Just get a few licenses, get people to use them. And in those environments, don't just have this is John from finance and Hillary from HR and they're playing with these tools. Get your IT person in there with you, call them a product owner or whatever else you want to call them. Get people around those things going, actually, I can see what you're doing with it now. That use case, it might be able to be done in Copilot, right? It might be, now they understand it. Oh, actually, yeah, you can do that. It might also be, actually, the way you're using that, I can understand why Copilot wouldn't work, but then it's a case of going, okay, but do we think from a business point of view, the outcome or the value is sufficient to say, yeah, we're now going to go and invest in another tool and the management that goes alongside it. And it is that then the debate and the conversation rather than trying to get to the it's right or it's wrong.
So let's take that in two different directions. So the first direction is people and their skills. What you said, 100% correct, that you need to, if you've got two tools, you need to manage two tools. It's not double the overhead, but it's an additional overhead. You also need to make sure that your folks understand what they can and can't do with the tools that you have available to them. Now, take it back. I'm going to go back 6 months to I was at another conference and somebody stood up and made this point. And I'm going to try and do it word for word. It's not going to be perfect, but they made this point, and I thought this was an amazing point. What I said is, even now, you're going to get some people who will go on Instagram and say, right, I'm going to take a quiz to find out which friend I am, or am I Joey, am I Chandler, whatever. And I'm going to put my name, my mother's maiden name, my national insurance or social security number in, and it will tell me what type of friend I am. And just in that one question, you've got so much to unpack, right? But the point that she was making was that You have folks in organizations who will still do things like that because they don't see the risk. Just this basic point about, do people understand if you have information security classifications in your organization? Do the folks that you employ, do they understand what they can and can't do in different tools? Because if they do, then this concept of a sandbox or an environment or a test or a pilot license or something, right? I don't mean flying a plane, but you're testing something for a period of time in your organization. That becomes easy if the workforce understands what information they are allowed to use in their play areas. It becomes very difficult if that basic understanding kind of isn't there. And there is a point around, when you join a big corporation and you go through the kind of induction training, don't give your passwords to everybody, don't set the building on fire, don't have fights with people, that kind of baseline of induction. We're not really giving people the responsibility as adults to figure out what they can and can't do. So there's a whole spectrum of things there in the people side where we're almost prohibited from the sandbox piece. On the technical side, we have some of the things that learning and development people want to use. They're graphic media tools. We want to make some avatars, we want to make some cartoons, we want to make some pretty pictures, whatever it happens to be. Those are just licenses that you buy. When you're doing those things, if you want to make an image in any of the image generation tools, you want to make a video, Sora, VO, whatever you choose to use, the chances of there being company information in there, pretty slim. I want a nice picture of a boardroom with a bunch of people in suits so I can make a point about leadership. There's no company information in that. So we have these two sort of points where, one, does your workforce, do your employees understand what information they can and can't use in different tools? And on the other side, we have, does your workforce understand where they can play, where they're just not even using company data? Because some folks will say, I'm not allowed to use this at all with company data, but I want to make a picture of a bunch of people with suits. It's kind of okay, right? So the technology capabilities versus and the use cases versus the understanding of company information. These two things need to come together. Are you seeing that nuance being talked about when you have these conversations?
I think it's a great point, and I think you probably get to the heart of a lot of the challenge, right? Because the conversations aren't happening from what I see. Or if they are happening, they're happening in little silo teams rather than at company level. So if you take a step back and you go, okay, you talk about information risk, where's the risk actually sit? Who's the one that gets in a mess? So this is an example. So you own a car, you let a child into your driving seat and drive the car, and they drive it into a wall. No injuries, but the car's damaged and stuff. Where's the risk sit? Is the risk with the child because they got in the car, and once they were in the car, it's their risk? Or is a risk with you who owns the car, and therefore you shouldn't have done that, and therefore you're the one that's in bother? And I think when I look at it from a corporate point of view, the corporate mindset when it comes to risk will always default to, it's my vehicle. All the risk sits with me. Well, even if you're not in a corporate, even if you're in a small business like we are, you as the owner, the risk is on you. If something goes wrong, you're the one that takes the hit, no one else. So it's very easy sometimes to fall into that trap of, you can't do anything. Because if I let you do something and you get it wrong, it's me that carries that risk, not you, ultimately. Those honest conversations don't happen. What you get is what you were talking about earlier, which is either people are too afraid, or you get the big long list when you start the company, shalt not do X, Y, Z, all the way through to triple Z, massive long list of things. Everyone's like, right, I'll just sit here and I'll do my job and not touch anything. You'll have organisations that over the years will have. Internet was always a great example, right? Am I blacklisting sites? Am I whitelisting sites? Am I, how much am I locking things down? But to your point, there's that whole grey area of, okay, get all that. But if someone's wanting to create a picture of, I need a pretty boardroom with some folks in suits, is that really a risk? Is that okay? And how do we have that more grown-up conversation that says, look, here are the guardrails for the company. Here's some real big, do not put in, the company's financial data, certain things not to put in. And I think some of that goes beyond work environment, incidentally, as well, to the point you were saying from your session a few weeks back, where someone stood up and said, people will still put in their first name, surname, mother's maiden name and stuff, just to, what friend am I? That's not a work responsibility, right? Some of these things aren't being taught. And essentially, I was sat with my daughter the other day doing her some finance work because she's off to university in September, hopefully. And She came down and says, I've opened another bank account. What do you mean you've opened another bank account? Oh, mate, mine's on Monzo, whatever it was, so I've opened one. It makes it easier. Okay. But you understand now, you've already opened one, and that's now second one. You've got something called a credit file, and I didn't know that. And actually, we ended up sitting for 2 hours talking through. Says, why are these things not taught in school? How do I not know some of these things? So I think some of these basics, it's difficult as a corporate business, but yes, we want to treat people like adults, but at the same time, we have an assumption that they're joining us as an organisation. How to put it, with a level of common sense that may or may not be there. So how do you put the right guardrails in place without going, well, I've assumed people know these things, so I don't need to say it. If I don't say it and it goes wrong, what do I do? So it's a really tricky grey area, but it's got to start with some open conversations. I don't know, what do you think?
So yes and no, right? It has to start with some tricky conversations. But back to the point that we started with. I think we started with this, or maybe it was the second point. We're assuming in conversation around AI disruption that people will be good at critical thinking, problem solving, judgment, the things that we expect people to do. But on the flip side, we're treating the workforce like children, saying, don't touch the red button, don't put your hand in the fire. And those two things can't really go together. We have to some degree, homogenize that people are adults, people have some kind of responsibility, and we have to be able to trust them to make some judgment. Because if we never trust people to make any judgment, we can't then say the future is where people have the ability for judgment, to oversee machines, to make sure that the decisions that are being made are correct. Those two populations are not the same. And if those two populations are not the same, how do we bridge that gap? And it can't just be an upskilling conversation, because the gap is huge. How do we do that?
Question is, are we going to solve it on this conversation? I think it's fascinating. And to your point on L&D, if I look at most organisations we work with, L&D will tend to be career pathways, the upskilling, all that stuff. A lot of organisations we work with don't tend to see it as, where's the, for want of a better phrase, where's the curiosity L&D? Where's the bit of helping people learn for the sake of learning, not just for doing a job? And perhaps that's part of the conversation. We've moved away from, not just in corporates, but in society generally, we've moved away from learning for the joy of learning, debating for the joy of debating and finding new things, to we learn to get a job, or we learn to learn something new and we can increase our salaries, or there's always we're doing it for this reason or that reason, rather than let's just do it because I'm back to the very first point. I'm just genuinely curious. Don't know where I'm going to go with it, but I'm just genuinely curious. And we have to feed that, because it's been trained out of us over the last few decades, because it's been the constant, you need to do this because then you're going to increase your salary. You need to do this, you can get a bigger house. You need to do this or this to get up the next ladder of the on the career path. And we've lost some of that wonder, is probably a better phrase. The wonder of, oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
But are we in a position where that kind of luxury, the luxury to learn in a way that's unfettered by the trappings of capitalism and economics? That sounds to me like it's a luxury commodity to have that time, because 2025 is upon us. We're in full swing. We're a third of the way through now. And every single person that I've spoken to this year, without failure, has told me it's busy. It's busier than it's ever been. So we have time poverty is a real thing. But we also have people need to learn such that they can make more money. We have the markets are not great, right? Different countries are struggling in terms of GDP and things like that. So we have all of these factors which lead us to a point, which is people feel economically squeezed. And if people, I mean, society is feeling economically squeezed, we hear this about the squeezed middle class. I can't remember exactly what the phrase is. But if we're in that situation, then the luxury to learn for the pleasure of learning versus having to learn for the sake of, paying your bills, it's going to be different. You'll to some degree we'll need to be able to afford the luxury of learning as a pursuit. That doesn't seem like it's easily solvable. And we have all of these attributes. The World Value Survey, I think it was, Inglehart, etc., have studied that how cultures shift over time depending on the economic uncertainty that they're facing. So liberalism generally is a society is well off. They can afford to be liberal in their views. When they're not well off, they tend to be more conservative and they go back and forth, etc. We see this with the politics of the day at the moment and for the last probably 10 years. But that leads us down a path of, if we can't learn for the pursuit of education, then to some degree we're not going to be economically prosperous, and that's going to lead us down a cycle. And we have the disruption of AI on top of this, where there are a lot of things we don't even need to learn, but we're not really sure what we should be learning. That's a very difficult conundrum. What do you think?
It is, but as you were talking, a thought occurred to me. So he said, it's busy. People are always busy, and then I always remember a phrase from years back, and I'm sure most people have heard it over time. If you ever worked in project land, you used to work with a program manager years ago who always used to say, "That's just busy work. It's busy for the sake of busy." And yeah, it's busy, and people are using their time. But at the same time, we're talking about AI potentially freeing time up, right? Because we've got these tools that can take a lot of that busyness away, all of that standard stuff away. Now, wouldn't it be nice? And this might be my liberalism coming out now. Wouldn't it be nice if, as a company, you went, well, actually, do you know what? Let's say, for example, today I employ 100 people, and our strategy is, as most corporate strategies always are, over the next X years, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is, we're going to double the business every year and all that. That's what everyone always says, right? What if I can do that? Still keep 100 people, so I'm not taking any jobs away. I might not be creating as many jobs. That's something that's going to be interesting. But by embracing AI, I can not have to add as many people to my business. I can still achieve my business strategy. So as my owner or the investor, I'm happy to my outcome's been achieved. But the time pressure's been taken off my people to a degree. And now they can start engaging in learning for learning's sake. It starts rethinking that whole, it's a paradigm shift of corporate mentality of, yes, corporates, you're always going to exist because you've got shareholders or whatever else that want to see that number going up. They don't actually care. Could be unfair to some investors, right? But normally they don't really care how you get to that point. As long as that number goes up, obviously that number goes up. So if you can find a way that says, I can at least or at minimum retain the people I already have, so I'm not getting rid of anybody, and I can then invest in the technologies, because over time, the technology will be a quantum less than if I'd double my staff costs. And I've given my people some time back, whether it be 20% of their time back a week or whatever else, to just learn. A lot of companies do that today, right? A lot of companies will have, not necessarily learning days, but they'll have you get a day, a quarter, whatever, to go and do fundraising or do some work with a charity or whatever else. Why not think of learning in the same way? And then do you rethink about the technology and the AI side and say, well, actually, it's not quite as scary because my people shouldn't be fearing these things because it's going to take their jobs. They can go, well, hang on, back to the 10x example. If we embrace some of these technologies and get them to work as us so we don't lose our identity, but it can make me 10 times more productive and I get some time back to learn something new, over time, you're going to have a more creative cultural environment.
Yes, but so yes, utopia sounds amazing. Let's do this, right? And as leaders of businesses, we can choose to do that in our business, but it's not just about our business. It's about all of the businesses out there, all of the social fabrics of different countries and the societies and cultures that operate within those different countries. All of the businesses, small, medium, and large, the big enterprises with the bureaucracies and the small companies with their agility, investors and venture capitalists and shareholders and all of this stuff. All of this makes the rich tapestry of the now nearly every name that I just put out there, all of the different categories of people we're talking about will have a slightly different view on this, and and not only the view but also the implementation of that view will be t-shirt size. Some places it's going to be great, some places it's going to be terrible. So if we take all of that, we're going to get variation, and that variation is going to inevitably mean that yes, in some places we will say we will put time aside for learning, for the pursuit of happiness, for well-being, for pizza day, for yoga, for etc., whatever it happens to be. And some places it's going to be a scramble for we don't really know what we're doing, so let's just have more meetings, and the spectrum will be evident. So I'm not 100% convinced that the utopia is going to happen in the way that we're describing. What are the pitfalls? How can we get there? How can we create this paradise that you describe?
It's got to start somewhere, right? So I was having a debate the other day with a mate of mine over recycling. So he lives down in Bristol, and he's really annoyed because in Bristol they've got so many different recycle bins now. I've got this bin for that, I've got that bin for that. But look at my dad in North Wales, he's the same, loads of different things. So it's like, so what does it matter anyway? China open and all these new coal mines and blah, 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 and all these new factories and burning fuel. So what does it matter if I do this or don't do this? It's, well, everyone's got to start somewhere, right? And even if you get a little bit further on, it's starting to look at that knock-on impact. So if you look at, then we come across B Corp. So B Corp as a standard or a tag for businesses initially was attempting to go beyond your normal sort of CSRs and say, okay, what really makes a business worthwhile and ethical in our world today? Now, some would argue they've gone too far and made it too prescriptive, but they started with an idea and they got 1, 2, 10, 20 people signed up to it. And then the people that signed up to it used it as a selling mechanism. So the ones that weren't using it were going, hang on, we were outselling them 10 to 1 2 years ago. They've got this B Corp thing. Now, other things could have happened, right? But they've got this certification and now they're competing with us 1 for 1. I need to do something different to compete with this. So I think whilst it's never going to, we're never going to be in this world where everyone's at the same level, right? There's always going to be that spectrum that you were talking about. That just part of life. There's always going to be a spectrum. But for there to be a spectrum, there needs to be some that are trying to push in the right direction. The reason they've done it is just to get to a just outcome. Now, this is where you get to an interesting grey area, and sometimes I get into trouble when I talk about this, because people get upset and say, oh, it matters why people do something. Yes, it does, to a degree. But let's say my company has a very ethical, just way to achieve a future outcome. If that means I now outsell my competitor 10 to 1, does it matter if they have the same ethical view and want to get to the same place? Or the fact that I'm outselling them 10 to 1 and they want to see those returns and therefore end up in the same place to achieve those outcomes to get the same sort of sales? Does it matter they had the same ethical stance to start with, or does it matter that they ended up with the same outcome?
Yeah.
And that's where you see the shifts, I think, across geographies, and whether it be investors or whether it be different cultures, when they start seeing, and that's human nature, right? When you start seeing front of phrase that FOMO is not a strategy. I get FOMO is not a strategy, but sometimes you can use it to your advantage.
I mean, this FOMO's not a strategy, right? It's a driver. It's not a strategy, but it's a driver of a potential strategy. Yeah, I think, the normal distribution, I can't go on about this enough. You want some people on one side, you want some people on the other, you want the bulk of the people in the middle to be trying, right? That's of course the thing we want. I think there's a huge difference. So I've spoken about this a few times in terms of the leveling of the playing field, the opportunity for leveling that AI brings. Small businesses can be agile. Small businesses can invest and invent things and trial things and use them in a way that's much easier than a big global corporation can do. And that's just that's always been the nature of small versus big businesses. But the scalability that we have now is unparalleled compared to what it used to be. The ease of developing things, the ease of implementing things is also vastly easier. And I think did I give the example when we were talking on the panel? I can't quite remember. But the example was something in the order of Midjourneys or Runways of this world being 5, 10, 30 people in an office somewhere and being billion-dollar companies or multi-million-dollar companies. And previously you would have had to have a huge headcount to get to that same point. So we have this leveling of the playing field. How are you seeing that as something that you capitalize on or something that changes how you do business?
So for us personally, it's an interesting one. So we do have a strategy through to 2027, and we are currently challenging that strategy based on what we believe embracing AI can do for us. So, for example, we would have been traditionally, I've always talked about, as a consultant business, look, we sell brains. We sell a smorgasbord of brains. We sell brains, right? We sell people that are experienced and got lots of knowledge in various areas, whether it be architecture or design or whatever else. And that's what we buy. So for us to grow, we need to have more brains. Back to the conversations throughout this about 10xing, we start looking at, well, what are they doing? So just to use an example of just this last week, starting to look at some AI tooling, which is a really simple one actually, and it's part of the Microsoft suite because that's what we use as our main stack. And all it does is it takes your data from Microsoft project and creates your simple plan on a page on a PowerPoint slide. Traditionally, that would have taken somebody 6-7 hours, maybe a couple of days if it's a bit complicated. It's now done in 30 seconds. It's not massive value add stuff, but it means actually I've saved them a day of time. Now, as a consulting business, you then have an interesting conversation, which is why I was talking about you need to price based on outcomes rather than day rates as well. The outcome's still the same, right? The outcome is still, they've got the plan on a page, they've got the client's got the roadmap. Therefore, those two, take those two artifacts, for example, they might be worth X. If it's only taken me 3 days to do it rather than 5 days to do it, well, should I be reducing my cost of it? Well, the value is still the same to the client. Therefore, I should get the same value back, even though my cost profile is different. And that's what we start to look at in our strategy now that says, okay, where do you get that balance? Might you go, well, actually, there's a competitive advantage here because we might be able to do it slightly less, still increase our margins slightly, but do it slightly less. So the client gets the same outcomes. They get it a bit quicker, a bit cheaper, but we still make a decent head on it. And that takes us a step ahead of consultancy B, who we might have been competing with. And that's the stuff we're starting to look at now. Obviously, because we're dealing more on the people side. I know, Ash, your business, you've got the development side as well. So you might already be there, right, in some of the stuff you're doing. I don't know, how are you using AI in your business?
So a number of different ways. I'll go into them in a sec. But what you're just talking about, that I saw this interesting thing on Insta where there was this guy talking about exactly this point. And he was talking about designing a logo, and he's got a class of people in front of him. And he's saying, this logo costs $4,000. I'll build it for free, and any clients that you get over the next year, I'll take half the revenue, right? And then it opens this debate around, well, what if I get loads of clients? I don't want to give you all that revenue because then I'm losing the revenue. It's like, well, you will get loads of clients because this is going to be awesome, but I'm taking the risk. So you don't want to pay the initial. Would you pay more? Would you pay less? If you pay more, then you have the debate around, I'll make this for you in 30 seconds. Well, why should I pay you for something that you made in 30 seconds? Because it's amazing, right? So would you rather that I take 4 weeks to make this and I'll charge you day rates for this? It's like, well, do you value time over money? So he has this like whole series of videos where he talks about all of these things. If I can remember it, I'll drop it in the comments when we release this video. But that's a really interesting debate. Do you value time? Do you value money? Do you want this thing to take months? Or because I have the experience and I've done these things 1,000 times, I could just give you the answer on this, on this call right now. These are very different approaches. And it, to some degree, depends on the configuration of the client's business as to which of these they want. But I digress, right? So how am I using AI? So I'm using AI for a bunch of things that are, to me, automatable. So anything that follows a process where you get basically the same outcomes every time. They don't have to be exactly the same outcomes. The example of images is obviously there. If you want a bunch of different pictures based on a bunch of different inputs, the process of getting from input to image would be the same every time, even if the input's different and the image is different. So that anything that you can process like that, or you can create a process, I find it absolutely ripe for AI. So, for example, CRM configuration, whatever CRM you're using, there's going to be AI in there, whether it's HubSpot or Salesforce or something else. The first drafting of articles, so that basic research, I nearly always do with a lot of AI. And when I say a lot, I'll do multiple deep research dives as well as reading a bunch of papers and trying to summarize some of those. Now, that leads me to a point that I want to make, and that is any AI companies that are listening to this, increase the amount of documents you can put into a particular chat, right? So you've got all of these like baseline models and applications, Copilot looking at you, ChatGPT also looking at you. Well, you put 5 documents in and then it falls over. What use is that to anybody, really? So you've got these, and I was looking at the Kimi Chinese model that came out 2 weeks ago. 50 documents, right? Notebook LM, 50 documents. So we're starting to see some of this stuff change. Now, if you've got 50 documents, you can do a lot with 50 documents. What I was trying to get on was, if you there's a research publication kind of repository, Arxiv, ARXIV. Don't you know it? Do you know it? Okay. So it's academic literature, scientific articles. You go on the page, you look at all the computer science research that's happening. For example, if you're in the computer science section, you can look at everything that's happening in that area and you can read all of those papers. What I was trying to test was, right, I'll drop 50 of them somewhere and see what it comes out with. So I tried Notebook. Notebook did a pretty good job of summarizing a lot of that stuff, but also producing a mind map of what concepts were related to other concepts. So that was really, really good. Tried the same with Kimi, lower, even though it advertises 50 documents, it was able to cope with 10.
Well, that's a big difference, huh?
It's a big difference. I tried this with the OpenAI deep research piece. Deep research goes off. You know what a DOI code is? Yeah. So deep research went off. I said, do this particular piece and give me all of the references so I can go and read the references. It came back with, I think, 80 references. I clicked through every reference without paywalls and without errors. So paywall is if you're in a university, you can access the paper. If you're not, you can't. You have to pay for that particular bit of paper. Now, if I exclude everything that was behind a paywall and I exclude everything that was an error of about 80 references, about 10 of them worked, right? Still, it's terrible. I prefer to go and do a Scholar research, Google Scholar, right? You can access the actual PDFs. You can read the actual PDFs. Gemini research, so Flash experimental, again, 5 documents up, fine. The hit rate was much better, but the number of references were lower. Perplexity is slightly better. Perplexity did have the habit of making things up, even though people say Perplexity is amazing. When scrutinized, so I was doing this piece where I was looking for an example of something that was done in the rail sector. I want an example of using, let's say, AI in locomotives, trains. And it gave me a great example. It was talking about this particular company. It's a famous company, and I'm not part of that company, and they're not one of my clients. But it was, yeah, I won't name them either. But gave me this great example with figures and stats and everything. They did this, it gave this particular output. And I'd gone back and forth with Perplexity for, I don't know, a good 25 prompts at this point. But I ended up with something that was really good. And I said, where did this come from? There's no reference. Give me a reference. Is there a website? This is part of this company's internal documentation. You can contact them via this website. And I'm like, great. How did you know? So anyway, long story short, I use a lot of AI in my research to get that baseline of information. And yes, I fact check and read every paper. Not everybody does, which eventually leads me to publishing maybe an article and some posts and whatever about the article. I do use it for first drafting of posts. So if I've written an article eventually, then I will say, right, summarize the key points of this article and give me a post that I can write on Instagram or something. And it'll do that, and then I'll have to go in and rewrite it. So there's the social side of things that starts to come out of the research side. So what I've said so far is there's the sales and the marketing side. There's the content generation side of things. Then there's the research and analysis side of things. And then we go into socials. Let me deep dive into the research and analysis piece. So if you're doing a project for a client, you want to do some searching on that. It doesn't matter if you're doing searching for an article or if you're doing searching for a bit of analysis. What's your first point that you want to, where do you want to start if you want to get a list of things to read? Go and use one of these engines. Why wouldn't you? You might as well. So there's that side of things. Now, if I move that on a little bit, you have the concept of automation, AI workflows. So where do you use some agents that maybe have been trained on things that you want to do? One of the things I was building was, for no reason, because I don't do this in my business at all, but I was building an end-to-end AI workflow for learning. So you have the classical ADDIE process for learning departments. Somebody says they want a thing, you go through needs analysis, and then you design something, you develop something, and etc. Each of these is basically a process. So how do you do analysis? You need some information, but you go back and forth, and you eventually have an analysis on what the organization or business needs or what the learner needs. And then you go into design, instructional design, experience design. It's still a process. So I've been building one of those end to end. With a form, you drop something in, and then it just whizzes through the whole thing. And out come your media artifacts. Click of a button. That was a curiosity project. That wasn't I need it in my business project. So I do a lot of things like that. But all of the structures and processes around things that support my business, the sales, the marketing, the content workflows, the first line of research, all of that, I use a lot of AI for those things. But the question of data, I've been doing research for 15 years maybe. I have repositories of references that I've read in depth and quoted, and I use them in my articles and all the new stuff that's coming out. So you'll need that repository of data, and you'll need to be familiar with all of that if you want to actually make the points that you want to make. The other thing is podcasting, right? We're on a podcast right now. We're recording something. What will I do with this afterwards? So I use Riverside. This is being recorded on Riverside, which has AI capability in it. So from this, it will segment the conversation that we're having into chapters, which I will look through. It will give me a transcript, which I will look through, and it will generate clips for socials automatically, which I will look through and make sure that it's making the points that we want it to make. So that whole process doesn't take very long. So also in this kind of field, it was prohibitive before to do this that we're doing right now, because you need to go find a studio, you need to all have your cameras, you need to then find somebody to edit it afterwards and stick the subtitles in and all of these things. It's the click of a button now. So that's a handful of use cases. I guess you're using AI for many of these use cases as well.
Yeah, but just on that point there, when you mentioned Riverside, a little tongue in cheek there. So we were talking earlier about everyone's really busy, right? Not got the time to learn these things. I'm assuming you made a choice to take a small amount of your very busy schedule and say, I'm going to choose to learn how to do this because, I don't want to go into a studio and sit and do this. You made a choice to proactively go and look for it rather than sit and wait for someone to tell you. Now, obviously, it's easier when you run the business, right? But if you were sat in any organisation, you could still do the same. I remember doing that when I first started out in the tax office many years ago, being sat in a room and said, "You're now managing that team." It's like, great. Do I get any management training? No, let's crack on. Back in those Google, right? How do I manage a team of people? It's that natural ability to go and look at it. And we said, what are we using AI for? A lot of similar use cases. So we don't do any podcasting or anything at the moment. Might do after this. It's an interesting experience. But we have got massive repository of stuff. 25 years worth of material, not just from research, but from client projects, etc. Where in the past it was a case of using people who had the experience on a particular project, now go and do the same over there and start again. Actually, we're starting to develop our own in-house tools based on some of the ones that are out there in the market to say, how can we take this, but then bring it into our world, train it on our things, but keep it within our environment so it's not going out into the wider market. And therefore, actually, there's an opportunity there to say, we might have some interesting products coming down the line that are not just products for the sake of it, they are products that actually work in a consulting environment. I think in the past, you have lots of consultants who say, oh, yeah, we've built a thing and it does this, but it doesn't really do what they do as consultancy. It's like a bolt-on as a separate thing. Whereas now we can create products that are complementary first to our consultants, but then you can see a roadmap that says at some point we can then turn this into something we can sell into clients. Because you've always got to be thinking that way down the line, because otherwise, where's your revenue going to come from in 3 years' time? As these things are emerging, you either get on there or you just wait for someone else to do it first.
But I think this is a key point that I have and you have as well. That is, I have a history of things that I've written. I have a history of conversations that I've recorded. I have models and frameworks that I have developed. So to some degree, if I'm using AI as an accelerator for those things, there is a rich history of training data that I can use to support the things, which gives me an accelerator. If you don't have those things, you can't really start from scratch. You can't say, write like me if you've never written a thing. You can't say think like me if you've not had a thought, right? That's a bit extreme. But you know what I mean? There needs to be that kind of that baseline for you to be able to accelerate what you do with the AI tool sets that are out there. The other thing that we haven't discussed that I probably won't go into right now, but there is we in my company, we also build things for clients. And, we use the Azure and AWS kind of environments to build software solutions, but they tend to be bespoke needs. So I wouldn't say I use AI for that. That's probably not the right term, but it's building AI solutions, which each of those then do a thing. They have an outcome. They have a function that they provide. But automations is a key one. So if we look in the enterprise space, Power Automate is probably the tool. Do you use that at all?
Yep. So we have two things. So we've got Power Automate, but we also have a partner. If I can, I don't know if they're on the name or not. So that's our application platform, TAP. They are a Microsoft partner, so they play nicely in the environment. And what they do is they, in effect, like all Microsoft products, right? Just look at their cyber credentials. They have a level around it. So that's Power Automate has a level, but if you want to go above that, what do you then do? And that's what we do with TAP, and that helps us build out our environments and the way we operate and work.
Okay. And for those watching who are from small businesses, you can also use any of the other popular platforms, Make, NA10, etc. Zapier.
So yeah, I used to use that in the early days when it first came
Yeah.
out. It was good fun. That was good fun to play with that, or if than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of these other platforms are way better than Power Automate. To be honest, I think Power Automate needs work in terms of being intuitive to use. But if you're watching, choose a platform that suits your level of coding ability and the needs and the things that you want to do. I think that's the fairest
Well, I
thing
think
to say.
that's an important point. Is that that's going right back to what we've said all through this, which is whether you're a startup, whether you're a large corporate or anything else. What's the outcome you're after, and then use the appropriate thing. I always remember back to the panel when we had Patrick from BBC talking around some of their ethical AI principles, and one of them being, the right AI is no AI. AI is a tool, right? And it's a very powerful tool. Doesn't mean it should be used to solve everything you can find. And I think that's part of the conversation we're having. Find the use case, find the thing that you're going to improve, and focus on that rather than going, here's the one tool. And actually, AI is more than just a tool. As you said, AI can be a whole toolkit because there's all sorts of different flavors and versions, and they do uniquely different things. So it is a whole tool set. Don't just think, I need a hammer. Everything's suddenly a nail, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's a conversation. I was at a conference last week. I had this conversation with somebody where they were trying to. So they were a SaaS provider, and the conversation they were having with me was, we don't have any AI in our tool, and we're trying to find a way that we can advertise on the market that we have an AI powered something, right? And a few rolls of my eyes later, I was like, right, let's talk it through and figure out what actually you do, because I find it hard to believe in this day and age that there's a platform with analytics that doesn't use machine learning, right? Let's just take that as a very basic example. And eventually we got there. Yes, they use machine learning for their analytics, right? Fine. So that's a type of AI. And if you really wanted to make the bold claim that, you have an AI powered something, then that's a legitimate thing that you can say. But yeah, we go down this route of does everything need to have AI? Sometimes certification, blockchain is an absolutely great use case for. Sorry, certification is an absolutely great use case for blockchain. Is anybody using it? No. They're all looking at AI-powered assessments. This is the day and age we live in, right? Survey tools, .NET environments, go build an application. There's stuff like that, which, yes, you probably don't need always to think about AI.
Yeah.
But
that's the point, is about, is it black or white, right or wrong? And everything at the moment, we saw what phone earlier, didn't we? Everything at the moment, every tool out there is trying to find a way of, how can I say my thing uses AI? I'll find the smallest little thing, like I say, congratulations, you're now AI. Are you really though? And that's what makes it hard for the consumer, right? And the user that goes, look, apparently every 3 days a new AI tool comes out. There's a massive scale of what that may or may not be, right? And how AI is it versus, okay, that's just lipstick on a pig.
You see, I get really ranty and annoyed by this, which is, I'll go to a conference and everywhere you look, it's like, this is my AI powered coffee cup, right? And it's like, seriously, guys, it's like the whole junk tech side of the market. And the only reason junk tech exists is because you can sweet talk somebody who doesn't know anything into parting with their budget. And that leads me down the other ranty thing, which is big companies, and I mean huge companies, bubbles, multinationals. They will have people in positions, not everybody, of course. I'm not looking at you if you're watching this and thinking I'm talking about you, but not everybody, but there will be people in positions who got there because they used to drink with the CEO, or because they came to the end of their useful life as whatever they were doing, and somebody said, do you want to go over here? Sideways moves. Everybody rises to the level of their own incompetence or something. Whoever said that, right? So you've got this, and in big corporations, it's a problem. Why? Because they have more people. So you're going to have more people, in these kinds of positions. And usually, if they've been there long enough, Joe was there for 20 years, and he used to do whatever he did, and now he's somehow the head of this team. This kind of thing happens, but those are the folks who are most susceptible to being shown a shiny thing and being convinced that it will solve their problems. And this is the unethical side of any supply chain, really, where you can say, well, I've got my AI powered coffee cup and I'm going to go sell it to Joe because he doesn't know the difference. So you've got to be aware of that stuff. You really have to watch out for, is this actually answering the problem, the question that I have, or solving the problem that I have? That's very, very important.
Yeah, 100% agree. And that's back to curiosity, debate. Don't just because someone says, "Look at my new AI thing, isn't it? Isn't it cool?" Don't just go, "Oh, that's great. Yeah, let's go with that." Be curious, ask the questions, debate it, and then go, "Do I really need that? Is that really going to move whether it be my company forward, or is it going to help move me forward? Whatever the outcome is you're trying to get to, ultimately it's on you, right? It's what's the phrase, isn't it? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. If you've bought the same, you know, vaporware 3 times, okay, you probably need to start thinking a bit
Yeah.
more and
Yeah, but there's no consequence in a
debating
big
and
company, right?
researching and be curious.
But there's no consequence in a big company, right? If you're like, if I make the wrong decision and I fail, my business fails. It's done. If you make the wrong decision, you got mouths to feed in your business and the business fails and it's done. If you're in a big enough company and you don't have to be the CEO of a big global company to have a few tens of thousands of a budget that people want.
Yeah.
That's a much lower level than the decision maker. So to some degree, there's no consequence. It's just, a couple of things that you can move around on a spreadsheet. So I don't think that this accountability point exists for the biggest of big companies.
I think you're right, but to pick up your point, we're the same. When we've started, I've often said to people, especially in the sales space, if you've come from a large SI, right, you used to say, we're not going to hit this quarter. All right, well, just shift that number on your spreadsheet, move it to that column, and we'll rework it. In a small business, okay, you sit in that room with 5 people. Who's not going to get paid? Is it you?
Yeah.
Is it somebody else? It does make it real, and a lot of people struggle with that. I think sometimes, just from a small business point of view, that mentality of, okay, if you don't do your thing, someone else that you are sat very close to, and you're probably friends with or whatever else, they might not have a job. They might not be getting paid. It makes it a lot more real. And I don't know. I've not yet found a way of how do you bring that level of reality and accountability into the larger corporates. Because you're right. Without that, you will, this challenge of bad ethics in technology will persist because they'll just keep selling to the large corporates because they go, off you go. We'll sell this again. It won't work. No one's going to lose a job on it. It'll just be, we'll shift some numbers around and off we go again.
Yeah, it's a problem because junk tech therefore exists, right? Because it has a captive market. And the first place I noticed this was the first wave of reskinning of ChatGPT, right? You had so many software products out there which were ChatGPT for this, GPT for that, and you look at it and it's fine. You've used the API and put your logo on it. That's somehow a new tool. And yeah, people were like, hand over fist. Here's loads of money, right? Just give us your shiny thing. It's like, great. Why are we doing this? But anyway, let's take this a little bit circularly to something that you mentioned earlier. So you mentioned the Johnny Depp version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Oh, wow, we're going right with that. Okay.
You thought you got away with that one, right? So I think there have been 3 Charlies and 3 chocolate factories. And the first one was, 1972 or something, with this little blonde guy. Yeah, this little blonde guy who's now a dentist or something, right? The kid. He went out of acting, and I think he's a dentist. But I don't know if he's any good, but yeah. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. And yeah, Gene Wilder and all of those folks. And I remember he found a shiny 50p in a gutter somewhere, right, in the snow. And then he went off and bought some chocolate bars. And then you had the Johnny Depp version. And then there's a new version with someone else that I haven't seen. But of those three versions, whichever ones you've seen, Dave, you've seen the Johnny Depp version and the original?
I've seen the original and Johnny Depp version, and I think you might be talking to some really sad now because I've got kids. The one you might be talking about is Wonka, which is a prequel to the original Charlie.
Oh, like an origin story, like how he got his factory or something. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, sorry, I thought there were three of the same film, which is why I didn't bother. It's like, why am I going to watch the same thing again? It's like Batman, right? Have you seen Batman? Like, how many times do I need to see the pearls drop to the floor before I understand that this is, the same origin story that I've seen 1,000 times? But yeah, I mean, there were nuances and differences between the two that I saw. And the first one had this feeling of need, right? That kid, he felt like he needed that. He needed that trip. He needed that chocolate. He was too poor to have that kind of luxury in his life. But he was a hardworking guy, and all of this stuff. He seemed like a good kid. And then he went home to his parents and his grandparents, and somehow after being in bed for like 30 years and muscles atrophied, this guy jumps up and starts dancing around the room. Don't know quite how that works. But and then they go off and they go through a series of adventures, and eventually the honesty of the boy is the thing that wins him the prize at the end, right? So honesty was the thing all along. The Johnny Depp version didn't really have any of that kind of feeling to it. It was a bit more just, okay, it kind of looks weird for the sake of looking weird, but it didn't really hit me as a story. What were your opinions of these two films?
I agree. So obviously Tim Burton was the director of the Johnny Depp version. You could tell that had the look and feel of a Tim
Mm,
Burton film. So it played more on just a bit. It played a bit more on the darker side of the actual book. So you got more of a okay, that's a little bit that story point at the end, which was it's gone. You've gone on that journey with them, and you've come out the other side. What I would say about the first one, though, as much as it's Charlie's honesty, I would argue, I'm really sad now, the only reason his honesty was taken into account was because of his grandpa's bravery, because it was his grandpa that kind of went into the room to start with and said, we're going to have it out with this guy. All of that got missed in the second film. It just became
probably.
yeah, isn't it nice? Bit dark, a bit weird. Happy days.
I mean, I love Tim Burton, right? But Nightmare Before Christmas is a classic. And Beetlejuice. Did you see the new Beetlejuice?
Yeah, not as good as the first one, but it was okay.
It wasn't, but there was a point where I went to cinema to see it, and there's a point where you have the opening scene and you have the kind of title of the film and the camera
Yeah.
doing the thing through the model world and the music, the Danny Elfman music, and it's like, this is a Tim Burton film. I'm watching a Tim Burton film. It was just like chills. Amazing. Feel it on the
Yeah, it was the first one that I did in a while. Yeah, we had to see it at the cinema as well. I think the first third of the film was like, but
where are we going with this?
it did come good. Good at the end of it. It was like actually they brought the story back around.
Yeah,
Cool,
I enjoyed
same
it.
good stuff.
But I was watching this thing on, it was probably Instagram, with Gene Wilder and how he influenced the script of the first one, and how he wanted to come out of in that opening scene where he comes out of the factory and he takes the steps down and he's on the carpet,
Yeah,
and he wanted to come out with the walking stick to make it seem like he was frail, and then do the roll and the flip and stand up to give the character a kind of nature of unpredictability, so that you didn't know what he was going to do at any point in the film. And
yeah,
I love that. That's absolutely
yeah.
great.
Because originally, I've seen that as well. So originally they were going to get him. The script said about coming out, dancing down the stairs and whatnot. Yeah, it was Gene Wilder that convinced them to do that whole bit without. And I think what made it amazing as well was without any music or sound. It was just him walking slowly, and then off he goes. Here we go. Here we go. This is going to be good.
Absolutely amazing. Great. The late great Gene Wilder. The other bit that I did see on Instagram was that that scene where he's saying to the boy, you get nothing. Good day, sir, and all of this. And that was, the kid didn't know he was gonna do that.
That's
So
right. Yeah, he was
completely natural
mortified.
reaction. Yeah. I wonder if that's why he's a dentist now.
He's got so mortified from that scene. He's like, I'm not doing that again.
You never know, do you? Right. Anyway, the modern films, of course, use CG and a lot of computer-generated stuff to give us our stories and give us the visuals that we see, while also glossing over the stuff where he was possibly a slave trader and etc. So there's that whole Disneyfication of things, which makes life interesting, but it comes back to this idea of how you tell a
Well,
story.
just last point on that. I mean, there's an interesting one, isn't it, with so many films now using CGI, and I think I'd have to do if you look at generally the box office numbers, or how well films do. CGI is fine, but if you put in all your effort into CGI and forgetting about the story, ultimately the film still bombs. The humor's
Mm.
one, yeah, wow, big spectacular explosion stuff. But if there's no story to it, nothing for someone to get emotionally connected to, so goes up and down. That's as you were saying earlier about music and the different things you can do with AI in music. Ultimately, you still want to feel a sense of a human creative process having gone on, so you can
Yeah.
engage with it and have that emotional connection. I don't think, could be wrong, I don't think at the moment we've found a way where computers can create that emotional connection.
No, but I think, the point about if you got a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? Have you seen Inside Number Nine?
Not, no.
Right. Two guys from the
I
League of
heard.
Gentlemen. And there's one episode of that where actually it's two guys in a room for the entirety of the episode, which is like a half an hour episode. And they're in the backstage of like a pantomime or some kind of theatre play. And they're backstage where the racks of clothes are. And there's like a little table and they're talking out whatever the plot is. And it's absolutely amazing. It's like, what, one or two cameras and two guys in a room, and that's it. That's the entire thing. And we saw this with that TV show that everyone was talking about a couple of weeks ago that I've now forgotten the name of, with the kid.
Adolescence.
Adolescence, yeah. There's an episode of that where it's just two people in a room talking back and forth. It's absolutely amazing. You don't need the CG to tell a story. You just need a couple of cameras and a couple of good actors, and obviously a script, etc. So down to need, I think.
Yeah.
Mm.
Absolutely. I think that's the theme of most of the conversation today, right? Ultimately, so many things it can do, and yeah, it can be massively disruptive, and it could be a generational disruption for us. But it's got to find a need and be used in the right way against those needs. Otherwise, it's just going to be another.
Yeah.
Ultimately, fall through the chasm of despair, or whatever phraseology we use nowadays.
Trough of disillusionment.
Solution.
Oh, that's great. So we've had a stimulating discussion for the last probably hour and a half, something like that, 90 minutes. We've talked about AI, we talked about society, we talked about organizations, we talked about change, disruption, and most importantly, purpose. Make sure that whatever you're doing has some purpose behind it, and then choose your technology appropriately. So, been joined today by Dave King from Differentis. Thank you so much, Dave, for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Ash. Really enjoyed it.
Pleasure. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you're watching this on Spotify, follow the channel. You'll get lots of clips and shorts on Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn. So follow us on all of those channels as well. But for now, signing off. See you next time.